Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to start this first panel of today's program by talking about some of the fundamentals of decision-making in NATO. And I'll restrict the fundamentals to the decision-making connected to crisis and reacting to military events or as enacting plans in a NATO setting. If you look at the picture on the background here and think that decision-making or life in NATO is very much about meetings where you sit around and discuss language and move commerce and etc., you're absolutely right. That's everyday life in NATO. And Ambassador Hauge can tell you all about that later on. Now, that might lead a lot of people to think that given that this is the slog of everyday life, how can NATO, now at 29 members, soon to be 30, hopefully, how can an alliance like that actually make decisions? Is it able to make decisions, as Robin said, as used James Matthews' words, at the speed of relevance? Is decision-making NATO's Achilles heel in its operational readiness? I will argue that it is not. And I'll come to three conclusions, and you can see sort of teasers for these conclusions here, by going through some of the procedures and some of the, what I can call facts when connected to NATO decision-making. First one I'll show you is this. And you go, whoa, what's this? This is NATO's crisis response planning system. It's partially based on this brick of a book called Allied Command Operations Comprehensive Operations Planning Directive. And it's the Bible that for people who do the staff college or the MA program at our school. Now, this looks overwhelming, but if you take a closer look, and we'll do that now, we will identify the key decisions. First of all, we can get rid of that. As in, that's just the transition phase. That's not interesting for us now because we want to get to execution, which is here. This is execution. To get to execution, there are already two key decisions. One here, where the NATO Council says, go planning. This is the NATO initiating directive. That's the first step. And the second step is this. The NET, as in the NATO execution directive, when the council says go operation. The NID and the NED. Remember those two. I'll come back to those. Now a quick look at planning in NATO. I found this nice little slide on the internet and sort of makes it easier to talk about this. There are two main types or categories of planning. One is crisis response planning, which is NATO's planning in response to an event or a crisis somewhere. So it's mainly out of area, and so we're not going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about that today. The other one is advanced planning, which is the pre-planned, as in the ones you prepare for. And of that, there are two types. There are contingency plans. And since the early 1990s, you can read in history books, these have been the main plans that NATO has had as sort of to prepare for Article 5 collective defense operations. And as you can read in the history books, the Norwegian plan is called Frontier Guardian. And as you can read in WikiLeaks, the plan for Poland and the Baltic states is called Eagle Guardian. Second type of plans are standing defense plans. These are different, are very concrete, and meant for specific situation or situations or areas. I can't give you any examples of that, but just sort of you notice that there are two types. The key thing here is the difference between these two. The contingency plans need more planning. They're not executable, and they're approved by the military committee. They need both a NID and a NED, as an initiating directive, go more planning, and an execution directive, go operation, to be put into force. The standing defense plans, on the other hand, are executable. They're detailed plans, there are forces identified, etc., and it's been already approved by the NATO Council, i.e. they only need a NED to execute. Now, as you've probably read in the press, and that has got a lot of sort of attention, NATO has developed a new type of plans since 2014, and they're called graduated response plans. Oh, that didn't come out quite well, doesn't matter. GRPs. And the GRPs may be placed in between the contingency plans and the standing defense plans, which means that parts of the plan is executable as it is. And what that does is to, go back to this slide, it takes away all that. And we're there. And that's all that is needed. NED. And you can go the plan, as in the plan can be enacted. Now, if we add to that, the Allies have given the main operation, the key operational commander in NATO, Secure, increased authority so that he can prepare the forces he has, which is mainly the NATO response force. He can prepare those while NATO headquarters is discussing. And that the VJTF, as in this main sort of the spearhead force of NATO, has the lead elements of that has 48 hours of readiness. All in all, this means that when a situation sort of occurs or something happens, these forces can start readying. NATO headquarters can sort of think and decide, and NATO can be ready to go in quite a short time. So, first point, NATO is working and has been working quite successfully, I would argue, on speeding up and improving its decision making. Second point, NATO can make decisions very quickly if it has to. 12th of September 2001, the only time Article 5 has been evoked by the Alliance, one day after the attack on 9/11. So it doesn't take much time if needed. Third point, Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty talks about the collective defense and the collective sort of responsibility that countries have to defend each other. But it does also talk about the individual responsibility of all allies to consider acting if another member is attacked. And a good example of this is the reaction of the United States after the sort of crisis emerged or broke out in Ukraine in 2014. It didn't take very long before the US sent 600 paratroopers from Vincenza in Italy up to Poland and the Baltic states in reaction to this crisis. They didn't wait for NATO, they acted. The US acted. Unilaterally or bilaterally in a sense, in cooperation with the countries involved. And that leads me to my three conclusions. Allies are working on improving, including speeding up its decision making. Allies can decide very quickly if they want. And in the end, it's not the decision in Brussels that is the most important. It is the decision in Washington, Berlin, London, etc. That is the key, because these capitals will have to decide whether they want to help or not, and they can do that. They will probably do that as a collective in Brussels, but also individually, and they can act before they reach an agreement in Brussels. So, all in all, NATO decision-making is not the Achilles heel of the alliance. It needs to be worked on, and the alliance is doing that. But, as I've been trying to argue, NATO isn't in such a bad place. Thank you.